What industry is a lot shadier than it seems? The maritime industry. Most of the big companies do things by the book and treat crews well because they are afraid of lawsuits and unions, but many smaller mom and pop companies break laws and violate safety regulations with reckless abandon because they are not as visible and can stay under the radar, so to speak. It's very common for a small company to ask a captain/crew to do something illegal and dangerous in order to increase profit, and for the captain/crew to comply out of fear of losing their jobs. And that's just the US maritime industry. Sailors from poorer nations who work on ships are often fed little more than rice and cheap ramen for months at a time and paid pennies for their back-breaking work. I love running tugs for a living, but the industry as a whole is rife with shady business. IDK if it falls under maritime, but I took one look at the job listing for a cruise ship and now I tell all my cowhawkers to never take a job with one. I'm a stagehand and theater technician. I make decent money fresh out of college. $18-24 an hour depending on venue, even without joining the union, because I do specialized work. Looked into a lighting tech spot on a cruise ship, and I'd be getting minimum wage working 50 hours and 7 days a week. Wi-Fi on board costs money out of my paycheck. I'd be in charge of passenger safety off hours. If an alarm goes off and we have to get people onto rescue rafts, I'd have a roommate in a small bunk, and all my wages would go directly into a ship debit card so I could give my income straight back to the company to eat. Something about living and working on a boat in the middle of the ocean seems to make employers think they don't have to actually care for their employees. I can imagine working on a boat that isn't filled with people on vacation would be even worse. Dietary supplements, it's gotten better, but there's still a lot of half-truths and whole lies. Not all that long ago it was seriously like the wild wild west. A lot of hobby fish importing is pretty shady. You have farms of certain types of fish like bettis in some areas of the world that are run with the fish in horrible conditions, which is why a lot of the ones you get in a major chain store are sick before you even bring them home. The stores will blame the fish being stressed, but I've ordered and received hundreds of fish from small breeders/sellers and outside of gory catfish that really enjoy committing suiciding by poisoning their own water. The fish arrive healthy and fine. Outside of boutique fish farming, the way some wild fish are caught is just horrible. The trappers will likely poison the water supply to knock out the fish, then scoop them out of the water without a care for that area's ecosystem. This has led to depletion of some natural species to the point they are now endangered. Lastly, boutique fish sellers/major chains do not give half a rat's ass what happens to the fish in the end. This means that people who buy fish like plecus, bettis, goldfish, etc. end up getting sick of them and dumping them in local waterways to supposedly get rid of the problem. So in some areas, these fish have completely destroyed the local water ecology because, like other invasive land species, they were never meant to be there. One of the worst offenders is the lionfish in Florida. It's venomous and has no natural predators, so its population has exploded out of control. The same is true of plecus and goldfish. Basically, releasing fish into the wild is a terrible idea. Releasing any animal into the wild can have disastrous consequences, but fish are being released into a very limited ecosystem and outside of a few diseases. If they can adapt to the water and have no predators, they will survive and breed incredibly quickly. I love my fish, I love the hobby, and there's a lot of value to it as global warming may make things like reef tanks a valuable source of coral in the future. But there's also a lot of bad to it. Trucking. The margins are razor thin, and so everyone is trying to nickel and dime each other constantly. The drivers lie to their dispatchers, the dispatchers lie to the brokers lie to the clients. All of this for like $50-100 sometimes. I worked in trucking, and the head hour lady for our distribution center was skimming payroll, shorting the checks of the lowest people on the totem pole, then getting cash infusions to petty cash from corporate to return part of the theft as an emergency tide over until the employee's next check, then claiming the rest of the theft as an overage on the next payroll report. I'm probably missing a step in her chain, but I'm not an accountant. It was a scam. She managed to work for a couple of years due to a lack of oversight during nationwide management shifts. When she finally got caught, rather than take the bad publicity, the company just let her leave. The last I heard, she was working in the same position in an adjacent industry, but still involving transportation. I used to be a broker, couldn't stomach the lying. The guy I trained undertreated drivers like shit. For instance, he'd lie to them about having appointments and give them the runaround when they eventually figured it out. Only I'd be the one to take the calls and had to pretend there was some big mix-up or blame the consignee. Just keep spinning some complete bullshit all day long, sometimes for a few days, while the drivers just sat in a parking lot. Want compensation for your time? Read the fine print, schmuck. Ratacan sign says no detention, no layover. They'd have to keep calling back for a week sometimes, while I pretend like he's out to lunch every time they call until he finally answers. Then it's just this 30-minute long argument which inevitably ends in them getting shortchanged, and he'd act like he was doing them a big favor paying below industry standard detention. That money wasn't even coming out of his pocket. He'd turn around and ask the customer for more money because he's got to do right by his drivers. They'd give him the standard rate and he'd pocket the difference. This guy makes $300,000 a year. Pet industry. Basement puppy mills and dogs that are so inbred they can hardly breathe. There are plenty of ethical breeders out there, and some unlicensed breeders are ethical, even if in a legal gray zone. But the conditions of some of the so-called puppy mills can be really bad. Sometimes when breeds are mixed and the pup gets the recessive genes the breeders weren't looking for, they straight up euthanize it because they know it won't sell. Not to mention how many purebreds are actually not pure at all and sold as is. Shady. This will probably get buried, but glitter. A manager of one of the biggest glitter manufacturers, Glitterx, said in a 2018 interview that most of the glitter they make goes to one buyer for a single industrial use. When asked who the buyer was and why they need so much glitter, she said, "Oh, I definitely can't disclose that." When asked why, she said because they don't want anybody to know it's glitter. Ever since this interview, people have been trying to guess what company or industry secretly uses most of the world's glitter and why they want to keep that use under wraps. Avocado farms. Most of the farms in Central America are taken over by the cartel because of how much money is in selling avocados. Recycling. Dirty little secret of the recycling industry is how much is either shipped overseas and dumped in a landfill or just sent directly to your local landfill. The good news is the toxic stuff is what is sent overseas. Well, good news if you're not in a poor country, I guess. Recycling is a much more palatable than selling our trash to China as raw materials. Health insurance. In the commercials it is all about caring for your health and stuff. But if you ever get a serious illness, they will do anything to avoid paying for your treatment. Source: my mother got breast cancer and her health insurance made a business decision to let her die rather than pay the $40,000 for her treatment. They made that decision, then hired lawyers to make it happen. My mom got to fight them in court while going through chemo. She made it by mortgaging the house. She told me the insurance company caused her more stress than the prospect of dying. More people died last year over vanilla in Madagascar than cocaine in South America. They've even coined the term vanilla murder. Farmers hire armed mercenaries to guard their crops from thieves near harvest time, and if one is caught, well, let's just say it's in response to all the farmers that were killed by thieves for the same reason. Not an industry, but higher academia is badly broken. Some of the smartest people are some of the most badly exploited. Old tenured professors limit the number of faculty many departments can have, forcing people to work as postdocs forever, effectively doing all the work the prof should be doing in the first place. Meager pay and long hours, plus constant pressure, makes postdocs some of the most oppressed people. The grad students are no better either. A lot of the times grad students don't complain about ill treatment, harassment and outright bullying as they don't want to jeopardize their prospects of graduating. If you're a foreigner, this situation becomes even worse, whether you're a grad student or a postdoctoral researcher. Sex toys. It's horribly unregulated, and there are tons of manufacturers that use unsafe materials to make their toys. R/sex toys has lots of great info for people looking to get any. Yep. One of my first toys reeked of cheap plastics. When I opened the package I thought it would go away, but it never did. Didn't even get less smelly, just kept off gassing for months. My dumbass still used it a couple of times, probably going to die of cancer. I've heard tell the personal lubricant manufacturers are similarly unregulated and not necessarily looking out for consumers' safety. Sunglass industry punny business, but yes, it's true. I'll use Oakley as an example because it's literally close to home. Oakley has not been the same since they were bought out. Oakley was a great company to work for with great bonuses, swag, and extremely high company morale. Their HQ is one of the coolest buildings you could find, and the people were always happy to work for a legendary company that really treated their employees right. Oakley knew their customers well, but at the end of the day, it's still a business. And Luxottica wanted that business. Luxottica bought them out in the end, but not through Oakley's own will. You see, Luxottica owns nearly all the major glasses brands and the stores that carry them. They are one step short of a full monopoly of the entire global eyewear industry. Luxottica wanted Oakley, so they took Oakley off all the shelves of every major glasses retailer until Oakley could do nothing but give in. Squeezed dry until they had to be bought at nicer price for Luxottica. The non-profit world, unfortunately. Most people at the top are in it to make a name for themselves and don't usually care about the mission of the organization. The last company I worked for was a small non-profit helping the homeless, and they did care and did a lot of good work. But the old CEO retired and the new one the board brought on was more interested in her own ego than anything. Fast forward 2 years from that point. 10 out of an original staff of 35 were let go in the span of 2 months, including me. Several programs had to be scaled back or stopped entirely. The organization came under direct auditing scrutiny from local and state government for questionable financial choices the CEO made, like using funds to travel by air what would normally be a 2-hour drive, repeatedly. And that CEO then resigned because of the hostile work environment created by the city. Another org a friend works for has come under fire for its CEO firing anyone that disagreed with her, especially when they stood up to her making potentially illegal decisions. And that's far from an isolated story. There's a lot of good people in the lower levels, but the C-level execs of these companies are sometimes crazy. All the idol industry is shady. I've seen some interviews on retired idols, and they have a lot to say about how the industry works. One of them even mentioned that they would split the profit 70/30, but when it came to pay, they divide the expenses 50/50. And if the group didn't make enough money, the idols would be in debt with the producers. Many times, idols would come out much poorer than when they entered. Rating services like Yelp refuse to advertise, and your good reviews magically get rearranged. Hey, look, if you want to do that and be transparent, I get it. But most every business owner knows how scummy this is, and most clients just have no idea. I have a business that isn't something that would usually be looked for on Yelp. They called and I just froze. Luckily I do long-term rentals and was sold out. Explained I wouldn't have an opening for months. They seemed to leave me alone. Yet they have my business on the front page of Google search under the wrong category. The gourmet mushroom industry. The short of it is that I pulled over to check on what I thought was a forest fire in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia. Turned out it was a wandering grove of, for lack of a better title, Canadian mushroom gypsies looking for Matasuki, pine, mushrooms, and chanterelles. Next thing you know, my car keys vanished, and I was put to work for 2 days with payment being a sandwich and a few beers. We wandered the forest, digging up pine buttons, and learned way more about mushrooms than I ever imagined, and we were warned heavily to stay close to our own /captors /kidnappers whatever, as the rival group was not above violent tactics if you entered their territory. This was affirmed when I stumbled upon an angry man from the other side pointing a shotgun at me. Whether or not there's truth to it, I don't know, but supposedly the mushroom world was once incredibly lucrative until the Chinese mob infiltrated it and gouged the prices. After 2 days my keys mysteriously reappeared with my car unharmed and nothing missing. No one would answer where it went, but they all knew. Hands down the nicest kidnappers ever, but it was a wild experience. Edit. Oh my land, to this blew up. I found the journal entry with the full story. A few years back I started writing short stories on my bizarre life experiences, and, thankfully, this was one of them. I'll find a way to share it as soon as I have better access than my phone. Are you sure you didn't eat some mushrooms first?